to the east of the village of Gallobanaiodis. It comprises a linked three-church complex and two-story monastic buildings, which constitute the eastern and western wings of the monastery. The oldest section of the church still standing is the Catholigon, dedicated to Saint Heraclidius, a domed cruciform structure. Its dimensions are relatively heavy, and the few morphological and stylistic elements preserved to this day suggest that it was built in the 11th century. In the 12th century, the chapel of Aios Ioannis was built. For reasons unknown, it later collapsed and was rebuilt during Ottoman rule. The second half of the 15th century saw the construction right up against the north wall of the chapel dedicated to St. John Lambadistis, the so-called Latin or Akathist hymn chapel, in which we encounter all the artistic trends which prevailed in the 16th century. At the southern edge of Pelendri village, we come across the Church of the Holy Cross. In its present form, the church is a result of several additions and interventions carried out at various times. Originally, a small single-aisle dome hall church was built shortly after the middle of the 12th century and was decorated with frescoes in 1178. The adornment of the main section of the church, which took place during the first half of the 14th century, is the work of at least 3 artists, who, however, belong to the same college. The first adheres to the Paleologian style developed in Constantinople in the 13th and 14th centuries. The second is more linear, employing a stylistic and less meticulous approach. The third one follows the local tradition of Byzantine painting as this developed in the 14th century, with his work focusing more on depictions of scenes from the life of the Virgin Mary, creating the most extensive cycle of the life of the Mother of God existing in Cyprus. The church of Banaia Podithou is located near the old Galada village, in the small fertile valley of the Gargodis River. According to the dedicatory inscription, the church was built in 1502 by the Greek military officer Demetrius de Coron. The church is surrounded in its 3 sides by a later yew portico, sheltered by the same steep pitched roof. The church was never completely adorned with wall paintings. Frescoes today exist primarily in the sanctuary. The main arch features the Virgin Mary enthroned with Christ on her lap. Flanking her are the 2 archangels dressed in resplendently embroidered raiments and bearing candles, bowing with piety and paying homage. Further down, in 2 tableaux, one notices the Apostles' Communion, complete with the passing of the bread and wine. These wall paintings are considered some of the finest examples of the Italo-Byzantine school in Cyprus. In the crucifixion on the western wall, both the elements which comprise it as well as the strong palette, the use of relative size, and the third dimension clearly indicate the influence of the art of Italian Renaissance. At the northeasternmost point of Ballechori village, one comes across the Church of the Metamorphosis of the Saviour. It is a small rectangular building ending in the east in a semicircular arch embedded in the straight wall. The arch depicts the Virgin Mary in an upright position of supplication between the archangels and is identified as the Lady of Angels. All of the icons are the work of the same artist and his students. The unknown painter of the Church of the Metamorphoses of the Saviour, who most probably lived and worked during the 3rd decade of the 16th century, is presented as one of the finest representatives of the Cypriot school of art. His excellence in the depiction of saints in a standing position is apparent. The technique employed is that used more commonly for movable icons, one in practice since the 14th century, even though it was not used in relation to movable icons in Cyprus until the 16th century. Panayir du Araga Church is located northwest of Lagodera village on the way to the neighbouring village of Sarandi. Architecturally, the church is a single-aisle dome hall with a cross-shaped roof. In addition to the later frescoes dating back to the 14th and 17th centuries on the external surface of the north wall, the adornment of the Panayir du Araga Catholigon was, according to the dedicatory inscription, funded in 1192. Of particular mention is the icon of the standing Panayir Aragiodisa holding Christ in her arms on the south wall, as well as a large inscription comprising a supplication offered by the donor, Leon Afthendis. The painter, identified by most Byzantinologists as Theodoros Apsevdis, is an established artist of great talent, well versed in the artistic trends of his time. The main characteristics of his work are the tall, thin and lithe classical figures, distinguished by lively movement full of dynamism and pulse, as well as the serpentine endings of their garments' fold. His colours, albeit bright, are masterfully blended, lending the entire icon a sense of colour, harmony and brilliance. Located in the northwest of the village of Bladanistasa, the Church of the Holy Cross of Ayasmadi is timber-roofed and surrounded on all sides by a covered portico that is unique in Cyprus. The adornment of the church was undertaken by a Hellenized Syrian Orthodox artist, Philippos Wall, in 1494. The artist appears to have employed various techniques, featuring an abundance of influences which, however, he does not seem able to assimilate in a mature way. The upper row of his frescoes contains various biblical scenes, strongly reminiscent of miniatures of medieval manuscripts. Much closer to Byzantine tradition is the depiction in the bottom row of various saints in a standing position. A very interesting and popular figure is that of Saint Mamas riding a lion. This features the traditional Cypriot iconography with Eastern influences, with the whole icon based on one incident in the life of the saint.
In a total area of 9,250 square kilometers
and a population of 793,000,
Cyprus is one of the oldest wine-producing countries. Based on archaeological evidence, we can conclude that grapevine cultivation began early in the 4th millennium BC. The worship of Dionysus proves how much the people of Cyprus loved wine. In days of old, the sole means of cultivation in Cyprus was the humble ploughshare, drawn by donkeys, oxen, or horses, animals one came across in practically every household. Have me pruned by two old men with white beards. Have 2 young and newly tamed oxen plough me. Have young men walk around me, and maidens trim me. Bring your jar close, and let me fill it. Let me pay off your hard work. The actual planting of vines follows age-old traditions dating back to the time when the Cypriots decided to grow vines from the endemic wild plant. During the planting, which takes place in April and May, there are 3 significant roles. The handler of the scala, the tool that makes the hole in the ground, as well as the actual planter, and the person arranging and watering the soil around it, are the protagonists of the planting process. At their beck and call is a whole army of assistants carrying water and saplings. Grape gathering in the more temperate regions begins at the end of August and ends in November for those regions at higher altitudes. O August, were you to come twice a year. Even to this day, there are people in Cyprus, particularly in Paphos, who adhere to the traditional stomping of the grapes.
I learned how to stomp grapes from my father. He also was a grape producer. After he got old and couldn't stomp the grapes, I would do it. I was young then. I inherited the foot press from my father-in-law. He had inherited it from his father-in-law. In this way, we kept the tradition of our grandfathers so as not to let it be lost. Nowadays, the youth has lost it all. The traditional dress, they lost respect for others.
Despite technological development, many Cypriot producers continue to produce their own wine. The grapes are poured into a special basin, the press. A rotating rod crushes the grapes, which then fall into the pot, which incidentally has been cleaned from last year's residue. The grapes need to be constantly and continuously stirred with a wooden rod, lest their fermentation cause the pot to overflow. And while fermentation in the clay vessels continues, a wicker basket is used to separate the solid mass from the vessel's liquid content. Of particular interest is the wine commerce practiced in days of old by the Kyragides.
He would come to see the wine and taste it. He would ask Spidias to open the one he liked and wanted to buy.